Okay, awesome. All right, Armina, thank you so much for being here with us at Meet. This is one of the first of our High Expert series, which is really meant to be a series of video or written content that highlights some of the clinical research, academic, or other work that's being done by various different Armenian professionals across the kind of brain health field. So this is looking at really any area where one is working with folks who are living with conditions that affect the brain or thinking about ways to promote brain health across the lifespan, so on and so forth. So our hope is that we can kind of highlight all of the wonderful work that's being done by different Armenian professionals around the country, around the globe. So trainees and early career professionals and just anybody out there can learn a little bit more about all the great work that's being done. Reach out if they're interested in becoming more connected and networking. So we kind of want this to be a springing board for some of that. So let's start by getting to know Armina a little bit. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about your current position, where you are in your sort of academic or career journey.
Sure, yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, this is a really exciting initiative, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So I'm Armineh Babikian. I am currently doing my PhD at University of Toronto, in Canada. I'm originally from the States, and I'm an occupational therapist by background. And so my PhD is in rehabilitation sciences and global health. And I also am a trainee at the Center for Addictions and Mental Health here in Toronto, which is Canada's largest mental health hospital, where I work specifically in the center that supports adults with neurodevelopmental disabilities. And I work with the Self Advocate Advisory Committee. And so they are people with lived experiences of intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health conditions. And they advise on research that happens at the center, and I help to facilitate their engagement in research.
That sounds awesome. And also sounds like a very um, diverse environment where you have exposure to a lot of different types of patient populations and clinical populations, right?
Yes, yeah.
Awesome. So I think you already answered part of this, but let's kind of learn a little bit more about your specific niche. So, what field of brain health do you specialize in? I think you mentioned occupational therapy, but tell us a little bit more about what kind of occupational therapy entails as a whole.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I have a clinical background as an occupational therapist. And so, what that means is I support people with their daily activities. The name comes from what occupies your time. And so, that can really vary from person to person and from different contexts as well. And so my work specifically, I was supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through the lifespan. And so that might mean helping people learn how to get dressed and brush their teeth, to even more advanced activities like how to use a computer, how to apply for a job, how to go on a date. So these are all different aspects that occupational therapists support. And so it's a very comprehensive field of rehab in terms of both physical, cognitive, sensory, psychosocial components that we address. And really finding ways to either adapt the activity, the environment, strengthen certain skills to help a person perform that activity in the way that works best for them.
Mhm.
And so from that clinical work, in New York, I was noticing a lot of gaps that were more systemic, beyond just the clinician-patient relationship. And so there were a lot of issues with access to care, with equitable health services. And so that's what made me think about possibly pursuing a PhD. And I also have a nonprofit organization called Therapists for Armenia, which I founded in 2019. And with that organization and our team of volunteers, we do different projects to strengthen rehabilitation services in Armenia. So simultaneously, I was also seeing many gaps and areas in the field in Armenia that needed support as well, especially when it comes to the population of people with disabilities. And so these experiences both led me to looking into going for my PhD and sort of shifting from clinical work to research. And so, yeah, so now my research is looking at sustainable development of rehabilitation services in Armenia, with an emphasis on meeting the needs of service users with disabilities, since they are the largest service user population of rehabilitation services in Armenia. And so really understanding how can the field better support this group that's often marginalized, both within health and social services. So yeah, there were many factors that influence this, and I guess I'll also mention the timing of when I made this shift was also in 2020, when COVID began, and then, of course, the Artsakh War. And so that's when I really got involved in a more systemic way with the ministries in Armenia, and understood that there were policy changes and large scale developments that were happening to strengthen the healthcare system. But I felt that I noticed that service users were not a part of these discussions, or if they were, it was very minimal. So, if we're making all these changes from a policymaker perspective or a clinician perspective, ultimately it's all impacting those using the services. So I felt like this was a really important piece that was missing. And so that's what made me focus my research on that specifically.
That's so awesome to hear. I mean, I think that sometimes with, academia or research and kind of any sub area you talk about, we sometimes talk about, the ivory tower, the folks who are doing the research and the gap that exists between those people and the actual folks who the research is meant to benefit or is focusing on. And I think you have taken a much more kind of stakeholder focused approach where those individuals have a voice and their needs are not just being met, hopefully, but actually being addressed and included. So there's more longevity to that approach. And I think that, seeing that this is being implemented both domestically, out here, but even more so in Armenia, I think it's wonderful to see that there's a growing infrastructure for it, and that, voices are being included who maybe previously did not have much of an opportunity to share about what their lived experience was like and how these things were impacting their day to day. So, on behalf of all of us, thank you. And I'm happy to hear that this is a kind of a growing area of question and answer and understanding. I think that's so wonderful.
Thank you.
Of course. You addressed some of this already, but maybe we can even zoom out a little bit further. So tell us about your journey to your field. So if you thought back to even, I guess, pre-grad school, tell us a little bit about what brought you to OT and beyond, what kind of maybe inspired you to pursue this path, thinking about maybe your undergrad studies or even before that.
Yeah, sure. So it's funny because I do qualitative research and there's a lot of reflection and reflexivity that we do. And so I've thought about this a lot and still thinking about it of why am I drawn to this topic and what is my position and the lens that I bring to this work. And I think I guess there are several factors. I think a big part of it is I grew up as a very active member of the Armenian community in Queens, and so were my parents, and I always saw community service as a really big part of our role as diasporan Armenians. And I always really enjoyed when, we would go to Armenian old age homes or like those types of activities where I got to speak to people and spend time with them and be a little piece of something that makes their day better. And so I always enjoyed helping people. Um, and uh, and so that led me, I think, into being more interested in psychology, which is what I pursued for my undergraduate degree, but also my own lived experience. My grandmother is deaf in one ear and partially deaf in another, and so also growing up, seeing someone with a disability and needing hearing aids and having to do things differently and learning about the stigma and discrimination that she experienced. And and then also my own like personal experiences. I lost my father at a really young age, and so I just really understood how life experiences can impact a person so greatly, and thinking especially about their mental health. So all of this, I guess, is part of what led me to a field that engages in supporting people reach their goals. And what I really enjoyed about occupational therapy is it's very practical and problem solving is a really big part of it. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to get creative and figure out different ways of doing things. And when you help someone reach a goal, it's a really wonderful experience and feeling to see them so happy and to know that like you helped them reach that point. So yeah, so these are all different factors I think that led me into this field, and then as I said, my experiences in Armenia were uh, also I got involved as a professional in Armenia. So then I would volunteer often, and so I got to know the field there as well, and it just felt like a really perfect blend of all aspects of my identity, and my passions, of sort of mixing uh, being able to help people from my motherland and then thinking now even beyond that on a more higher systems level, seeing if we can improve the quality and access to care for a larger population. So yeah, many, and I'm sure there are more factors as well, but yeah, right now those are things that I've thought about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you kind of touched on some of the things that in my next question that I was going to ask you, but I love that you did. I was going to ask what part of your kind of Armenian culture or upbringing affected your, choice to go into this field. But I think you did a great job kind of highlighting that it's a little bit of a mix of all of these things that brought you to this. And it's so wonderful to hear, um, you know, the pay it forward attitude, right? A lot of those things might be what brought you to this field, and now it's something that you've really embraced as something you hope to implement moving forward and at least be a part of sort of this growing movement, so to speak, in Armenia,
Mm.
and I'm sure beyond Armenia as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And actually, just this summer, I got Armenian citizenship. And so that's also been, yeah, just another way of reconnecting with Armenia and being a part of Armenia's story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So one of the other things we wanted to learn a little bit about, again, you've kind of touched on it, but maybe you can go into a bit more detail. If you are currently conducting research, so you already mentioned, you're working on, dissertation, and I'm sure you've had to work on all kinds of other research so far. So tell us a little bit about your current work, kind of what line of research have you been working on more recently, and tell us how that's been going.
Yeah, so my research, I think the common thread throughout, so both my dissertation research and then research I'm engaged in here in Toronto, the common thread is all really centering disabled voices and understanding how health and social systems can be more inclusive and equitable. This is a population that often gets left out of, when thinking about policies, but also research. And so I've really learned a lot about how to be more inclusive and accessible in research as well. And so that's been a really interesting experience. So, one research project that I'm involved in here with my supervisor is creating an interview toolkit that is adapted for people with communication differences. And so we are using pictures and maths and stories and question cards, like all these different strategies to elicit experiences of people. This project is specifically focusing on adults with intellectual disabilities. But yeah, it's just been really interesting to learn about how to adapt and modify approaches in order to really get the experiences of this population that is often left out of research. And then also understanding how these types of approaches really help the larger population and are often more accessible and easier to use for everyone. And I think that's a piece that, is often not thought about that, even if you don't have an intellectual disability, but everyone learns differently or has different preferences. And so thinking about how we have to provide alternatives and options, and it really is like a toolkit that we draw from and figure out what works best for this person. So that's been a really interesting project, and I've incorporated some of those pieces into my dissertation research as well, which, as I mentioned, I'm focusing on disability within rehabilitation services in Armenia. So I'm looking at I'm comparing Armenian policies with service user experiences to see how rehab can better support people with disabilities in Armenia. And so like some of those accessible strategies that I've used, I've created an easy read consent form, which is a consent form that is in simple language, has pictures, minimal text, like only what is really important and required, and even the formatting of the text. So large font, bullet points, so that it's just easy to understand. Um, and again, this was originally created for eliciting perspectives of people with disabilities, but I'm also talking to parents of people with disabilities, caregivers, and these strategies have been helpful for everyone, especially because those who are not familiar with research, like it's a lot of information to absorb. And so my work has been really wonderful. I'm in the analysis stage right now with my dissertation. And so I've been comparing now the experiences of adults with disabilities, parents of children with disabilities, as well as soldiers and veterans with disabilities. So it's been really interesting to see the different experiences and preferences and goals of each population, and then comparing that with what the policy says. And so, yeah, I'm hoping ultimately I can come up with some suggestions and recommendations for the Ministry of Health, as well as the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs in Armenia, the health and rehab service providers, and also for the service users to feel more empowered to advocate for themselves and support each other through lived experience, expertise as well. So yeah, so it's an interesting but stressful stage right now. But I'm hoping in the next few months I will have some solid findings that I will be able to share.
That is wonderful. I think that, there's a huge movement in recent years and recent decades to kind of move towards the idea of neurodiversity. And I think that what you just described is just highlighting that, like you said, everybody learns differently, everybody functions differently. Whether you are somewhere on that disability spectrum or not, I think that, this is a nice way to conceptualize how diverse we all are and how we show up in the ways that we show up. And the fact that you're also serving different populations, I think is wonderful. I think that in and of itself shows the diversity in perspectives and lived experiences. Parents of children with disabilities may have both commonalities and differences with service members. And I'm so curious to hear kind of what are some of the overarching themes and what are some of the things that are unique to each group. So I think that's super cool. So keep up the great work.
Thanks. Thank you.
Last few questions I have for you. First is just if you could summarize what is your favorite aspect of either the clinical or research or kind of both work that you're involved in? What are some of the maybe high points that you've had so far?
Yeah, I think it's been quite a journey, honestly, becoming a researcher, especially shifting from clinician to researcher. The research I was exposed to as a clinician was very much focused on interventions. What's the best intervention? How effective is it? What population does this support? And that didn't interest me. And so I always used to think like research is not for me. But then when I started learning more about the different types of research and especially qualitative research, that's what really opened my eyes to like, oh, this is interesting actually. And anyway, when I was a clinician, my favorite part was always building relationships with my patients and getting to know their stories. And so qualitative research really fit well with my interests. And so that's been one of my favorite aspects is using different methodologies, and methods and like interviews and focus groups and collaborating also with advisors with lived experiences to make sure that the way I'm doing my research or the way I'm interpreting my research really fits with those who might use this research. So those have been all really interesting and exciting aspects for me in terms of my research journey. And yeah, I also realize I'm really drawn to centering marginalized voices. I think especially as a woman and a a woman in healthcare in a position of leadership, I've experienced many things as well where my voice is not respected or valued in the same way that others may be. And so, yeah, so for me, I really enjoy learning from others who don't often get the opportunity to share their voice. And I think also sort of maneuvering that power dynamic has also been a learning experience of really making sure that the research participants feel that, I view them as experts in the topic, and that's why I'm talking to them and asking for their input. Even though I have this like title of researcher or someone from North America, but I don't know, everything about Armenia. I don't know about living with a disability. And so yeah, so I think also just finding my approach as a researcher that makes participants and my advisors feel that we're all in this together. Um, yeah, it's been a really interesting journey for sure, and I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, I can speak from my personal experience, the involvement in stakeholder-centered or kind of community-based, community-based participatory research or whatever practices that are really highlighting the lived experiences of the people that the research is intended to help, is the best way to bridge the gap between academia and the communities. I think that oftentimes research exists in a silo for academics, and is consumed by academics and so on. And while that's wonderful, it's not doing the trickle down effect so much. And I think what you're describing is as much as possible trying to highlight that trickle down effect where the communities that the research is about and intended to serve also get to actively participate in what happens, what it means to them, and what they're looking for. I think that that's, the very best we can and should be doing as researchers. I absolutely,
Hmm.
yeah. So now I'm going to flip the coin a little bit. What are some of the challenges you've noticed in, again, this could be research, clinical, or both, that specifically relate to either the Armenian community's engagement or access to brain health related information? So, what are some of the challenges or barriers maybe you've encountered?
Yeah, I think especially within Armenian rehabilitation, I think engaging in research studies is still very new to the field. And so I think a big part of it, it's like some of the challenges I was experiencing, even just like getting my study approved in Armenia as a qualitative study within healthcare was a big challenge because they are more used to like randomized control trial for certain interventions, and I was being put through like a very rigorous review process when my research is not as risky as something like trying a pharmaceutical drug for the first time. So maneuvering that process and being a part of uh, their change of these processes was challenging, but I'm grateful that there is more exposure to different types of research. So a lot of these processes are being modified. Um, and then also again, I think just for the research participants as well, really highlighting that I view them as experts and I've come to them as, to learn from them about this topic, and also that they are free to share both positive and negative, and it has no impact on their current services. So at times, there were people who felt very comfortable and were sharing everything, but then sometimes they were only sharing their critiques and not necessarily the strengths. But then other times there were participants who were only saying like everything is good, it's very good, we're very satisfied. And I think again there's a bit of that power dynamic at play, that here I am as a researcher, someone from the diaspora, from the outside, and maybe there's this assumption to impress or have certain views highlighted. So yeah, so some of those processes, and I don't think that's unique to Armenia. For anyone who's new to research, that would be the experience. Um, but yeah, it just was interesting to experience it as someone who is Armenian but not from Armenia, and how that impacts my research and my relationship with the participants. Um, but yeah, it was helpful that I had 8 years now of experience in the field in Armenia, and a lot of them know that I'm very much a part of the community too, and not just someone who came to do research and leave. And I'm here to stay, and I'm really here to help. Um, so yeah, so those relationships are really a big part of maneuvering some of these challenges. And I think just like another barrier is also the inaccessibility of research, honestly, to those who are not English speakers, who are not able to access, journals without having to pay for them. So just a lot of those aspects too, I think is something that as an academic community, we all need to advocate for changes in order to, as you said, sort of shorten that time where it trickles down to those who need the research and who are interested in it. So and I guess my future challenge is also my knowledge translation and how I'm going to share my findings and mobilize the findings with those who whom it matters to. So both to policymakers, to service providers, to service users, and I will need a different approach for each group that I target. So that will be something that I am thinking about and will continue to think about. And I'm sure we'll experience challenges along the way too, to make my research accessible and reach those people who should hear about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. I think, like you said, sometimes it's nice to think about kind of both perspectives, right? What are all of the strengths that have allowed me to do all of this great work? And then what have been some of the things that have posed challenges that you've overcome each time, right? So, like you said, these are things that you've considered along the way and will likely consider as you move forward as well. I like to think that it makes us more flexible as researchers and as thinkers of sort of thinking about what are some of the things that are specific to this context and country and population. What are some of the things that are general challenges that will always come up when you're doing research, and so on. So I think that it's nice to hear your perspective on some of the ways that you've overcome these things and still thinking about what are some of the things that may come up in the future that you're planning on addressing as they come up. Awesome. Okay, my last question for you is, what is something that you would like to share with our Armenian community in regards to just generally promoting brain health across the lifespan? So this can be specific to the communities you work with, this can be general, however you would like, but what's kind of a pearl of wisdom, so to speak, that you would impart on our community?
I think my biggest request is to include and remember people with disabilities in brain health work. It really cannot be generalized to a larger population without considering and including this group. And also just thinking about like disability is not if it's not already a part of your life, or if you don't know someone with a disability, you will, because everyone is aging. You don't know what will happen in life, and just in general, you never know who you will cross paths with, and so it's really important to include disability within brain health work. And if you don't know, learn from those with lived experiences. It's always best to ask. And so, yeah, I think that's my biggest request, is that we need to be more inclusive within healthcare, within research, and society as a whole.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I'm very thankful for your perspective. I think that, like you said, this is often a perspective that's not centered. Um, and I think that this allows some space for both hearing a little bit more about it, but also thinking a bit more about it. What can we be doing better as a whole, as individuals, like you said, as a society? As researchers, as clinicians, all the different identities that we hold. So I really appreciate your perspective, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences so far. And I think all of us, I'll speak for everybody, we look forward to hearing kind of the next things that come both out of Therapists for Armenia and just generally all the wonderful work that you're doing. So thank you so much for your time, Armineh.
Thank you too. And yeah, if anyone's interested, feel free to reach out. And please check out Therapists for Armenia. We're doing some really awesome things.
Yes, absolutely. Please check out Therapists for Armenia. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.